I asked Regina not to introduce you because, of course, this is a photo book festival and we are going to talk about photo books, but we are in the presence, Jasper Johns once said that Robert Rauschenberg was the most creative artist since Picasso, but I think we're in the presence of one of the most creative artists since Picasso here, because William Klein is not just a photographer, not just a maker of photo books, not just the maker of probably the most important photo book ever, but he's I can't list them all, he's graphic designer, painter, sculptor, fashion photographer, character in Chris Marker's film La Jetée, lots and lots of things, and also, as important as the photography, a filmmaker of great distinction, and a filmmaker who, unlike some other photographers, his films you can actually buy in Gilbert Jaune in Paris and not from specialist booksellers. So I think we're in the presence of a very, very special creative person, and hopefully one of the things I would like to talk about is this whole issue of how you do it, if you know how you do it, and how you began. And the normal thing in these conversations is to begin with how you began, but I would actually like to begin by asking you about Brooklyn, about your latest photo book, and how that came about.
I don't understand a word you said.
Right, we're off to a good start. Yeah, can you talk a bit about Brooklyn, the book you did about 2 years ago?
You want me to talk about Brooklyn?
Yeah.
It's the last thing I wanted to talk about.
Oh, really? Oh, well, then shall we go right to the first thing? I would like to talk about some of the people that you've known in your career, and you began with Ferdinand Léger. You did a course in his studio, and I gather he was a great influence on the way you thought about art, etc., etc.
Who what?
Léger.
Léger. Well, what about him?
Can you tell us a bit how he influenced you and the kind of ideas that he gave you, the things you learnt in his studio?
Well, I was in the army for 2 years, and the deal that we had with the government was that people who would be in the army, be soldiers, would be reimbursed for the time they wasted in the army, and if they were going to school, they would have 2 years of school paid by the government, and if they were working, they would have a job that continued the work that they had started to do when they got drafted. And so I took advantage of the deal that, can you hear? Can I hear?
Yes.
Okay, good. Anyhow, so I was in the army for 2 years, and when I came out, I was discharged in Paris, and I had the possibility of, I wanted to work with a painter, and there was a choice of four places to study painting: the Beaux-Arts, André Lotte, La Grande Chaumière, and Fernand Léger. In French, you say, when you say it's a cinch, something is obvious, you say, "Y a pas photo." And for me and for several others, the "Y a pas photo," to work with Fernand Léger was something that it was worth being in the army for. And curiously enough, he was not a fashionable creator at the time. Léger was somebody that was more or less forgotten. He was not fashionable. A young photographer or painter who wanted to learn something about the plastic arts would go to Léger's studio, and that's what I did.
Right, and so then you began painting.
I was, you might say, studying painting, but that's not something you can really study and learn. But Léger was somebody who was like a myth. He was a big, hulking peasant from Normandy, and he was like a little bit like Lee Marvin, and he didn't talk blah 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 about art. He would say, that's good, that's tough, that's strong, and that's it. No bullshit. And it was really great to see this myth who would look at what we were doing. We were in his studio. It was a traditional studio. There was a still life in the middle of the room, and there were about 30, 40 young artists who would paint the still life in the manner of Léger, actually. And somebody who would come in the studio would say, "Oh, all these guys think they're Léger," but we all thought that we had found a way of using Léger as a springboard, and that's the way things happened in his studio.
And so then, the next big step in your career, you had 2 shows in Milan, I believe, and that was a very important step.
Yeah, because I had the possibility of doing a show in Milano. It was I was invited by this avant-garde theater director called Strela, and it was a possibility of having an exhibition in the corridors and the entrance to the theater, and I had this show there, and a gallery director who ran an avant-garde gallery called Il Milione saw the show, and he said, "Why are you showing your stuff in the theater? Come to my gallery." And I said, "When?" He said, "Right now." So when the first show in the theater was over, I went to his gallery, and it was a real gallery, and there were a lot of people, and I had the luck of meeting an architect, an avant-garde, high-tech architect who had done a construction which was made of panels, of separate panels that were on rails that would separate a room, a big space. It would separate the room or go on rails on a wall and become a mural. And he said, "Can you do this? I want these panels to be painted on both sides." And you know, I was like 22 years old, and I said, I thought I could do anything, and I said, "Yeah, sure, I can do it." And so I started to paint these panels, and they were put together, and they became a mural or a space separator. And what happened was I photographed the result, and the panels were on rails. They could move, they could slide, they could turn. They can be put together, they become a mural or a space separator. And that's the first commission I had, and I was very excited to do that. And I photographed this construction, and what happened was that I had somebody to turn the panels and to move them, and they spun and they blurred. And so these geometrical abstract paintings that I did at the time were blurred, and I thought, well, that's interesting. It's something that you can do with photography. Use long exposures and get a blur. And the forms that you worked with, we all worked with geometrical forms, became something else. And so this was my first experience with painting, with photography, and for me it was a new way of dealing with geometrical forms in movement.
And then you must have met people from Domus.
Who?
Domus, the magazine. Domus.
Domus, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Domus,
actually, you know, they have an art school now, and I was teaching there last week.
So the
Domus Academy.
The architect was a friend of the people who put out this magazine called Domus, and it was a magazine about architecture, about painting, about dealing with space, and they did 8 pages on this work, and for me this was really exciting. The first time I had something published, and I realized that photography was something that would be interesting an interesting way of working with graphic forms and geometry. So those were the first really serious work I did in that direction, and so I did that for this architect, and then they were published, and I had commissions to do others, and I did several of these murals in movement.
And some were reproduced as covers for the magazine. Was that then, or was that a bit later?
Well, I did, yeah. Well, some of the things that I did in my studio became covers of the magazine, and they were popular.
Yes, and then how did then you come to meet Alexander Lieberman and go to New York?
Well, the work I did using blur plus geometrical forms were shown in a festival in Paris called the Salon of New Reality, and Lieberman saw my work in this exhibition, and he contacted me and said, "Come and see me in my office." I knew who he was. I knew that he was the art director of Condé Nast, all the magazines, Vogue, Glamour, and everything. And I went to see him, and he said, "How would you like to work for Vogue?" "Doing what?" And he said, "I don't know. We'll see. Maybe you can be my assistant, or you can take photographs." And I was really a primitive as far as photography was concerned. My photography was what people said later about art, fotografia povera, poor photography with no means, one camera, two lenses, and working with a magazine like Vogue, who had a lot of money and was willing to spend it on experiments, was a revolution for me. And instead of fotografia povera, it became photography with means. And so those were the beginnings of serious work in photography.
And did he commission you to do New York, or did you? Did he say you can do anything you like, and you thought you would like to go out and photograph New York?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Did he commission you to photograph New York, or say do anything you like, or do something for the magazine?
Yeah,
and
well,
you had the idea to go out and.
Lieberman had an attitude that doesn't exist today. He would be willing to finance experiments that young photographers would want to do, and he asked me whether I had a project. And my project, I was taking photographs, but I really had no technique and no idea of what could be done with the photography. And after these first experiments with moving panels and blur, I worked in the darkroom doing further experiments with these things in color and so on. And those were my first serious contacts with photography. And I had this idea that I could do anything with a negative. If I had the negative, I could put it in the enlarger and go to town, improvise and develop. And when I had this idea of doing a book on my return to New York, because I'd been away in Paris for 5 or 6 years, and I had lost contact with New York, and I knew with photography I would be able to say something different, something new, and it was very pretentious, but when you're 22 years old, you think you can do anything, and that's what I did.
And do you remember the first time you went out on the streets, first couple of times you went out on the streets, and the kind of things you were bringing back?
Well, I had no plan of what to do with the camera, but instinctively I used the camera as an attack of the crowds and the people, and I would move into the situation and photograph point blank, and that's what I did. And then I would go back to the dark room and do the enlargements, and very often I would see the contacts and be surprised of what was happening, and the experiments that I did in that way were very personal, and any old thing. My motto was the Cole Porter song, anything goes, and I realized that coming from painting, photography was an open book. Photography was, I felt, the least daring, the least experiment of the graphic arts, and I thought anything goes. A lot of things can happen with a camera, and I took advantage of that.
And did you look through the viewfinder all the time?
Yes, I either looked at the viewfinder and was amazed by what I saw, or I took photographs instinctively using a wide-angle lens and just plunging into situations where the camera would answer what I was hoping for.
And how long did you shoot until you had all the material that eventually became New York?
We're talking about the book I did in New York?
Yes.
How long did I shoot? It wasn't very long. It was about 4, 5, 6 months, and I was really amazed by what was happening on purpose and by accident. And my assistant, who's here, was very much surprised that the photographs that I took a year and a half ago in Brooklyn were much more numerous than what I did in New York. And in New York, I just did maybe 600 or 700 photographs. But in Brooklyn, what happened? I had a deal with Sony cameras, and Sony was making a new camera, digital, automatic, and I found that it was very, very easy and very painless for me to take photographs with a digital automatic camera. And my assistant told me I did 2,000 photographs for this project, this book I was going to do on Brooklyn. And in New York, with 500 or 600 photographs, that was it. It was a period of maybe 4 or 5 months. That's all.
And I mean, this interests me. When you were shooting New York and in New York, did you go and look at other photography? If so, did anything interest you at all, or did you think it was all quite unadventurous?
You know, when I was taking these photographs, I had very little contact with the photographic world. I didn't know any photographers. And there was no atmosphere of emulation. it's not like today, you know. When I took a photograph, I said to myself, "What do you do? What do I do with a photograph?" And at that time, there was nothing like what's happening today. I thought, what do I do with the photograph? And I thought, well, there was no exhibitions, there were no big blow-ups to cover a wall or anything. I thought, what do you do with the photograph? You make a book. And my idea was a photograph was useful for books, and it was really the only thing that I thought was worthwhile with using a photograph was to make a book. And I had already done graphic work to make a living, work with pharmaceutical outfits, and I could do abstract and graphic experiments. And I thought, well, I'll take these photographs of a New York that I'm rediscovering because I've been living in Paris and out of contact with what was happening with photography and the city. And what was good was that I had this instinct of knowing that what I was seeing and what I thought was important, I couldn't be wrong, because I grew up in New York, and every detail, everything that I saw and thought was important, I could be right, because there was no way of being wrong. This was it. And each time I took a photograph, I kept thinking, well, this is it. And I guess I was right for most of the time.
Yes. Can you tell us about now going on to make the book and the famous Xerox machine?
What?
The Xerox machine and making the book, the layouts.
What about the books?
You used the Xerox machine in...
Xerox,
Xerox,
photograph, yeah, what do you call it? Photostat
Photocopier,
machine.
yeah.
Yeah, I had this possibility of collaborating with Vogue, Condé Nast, and I saw that to do the layout of the magazine, they had this really state-of-the-art photostat machine, and I was able to do the layout exactly the way I wanted to, and that was, you didn't imagine that the photographs that fashion photographers took were really an entrance to a new way of taking photograph, and dealing with anything that came out. There was a way of working with them, with crappy photographs, out of focus, blur and everything. I was excited by the things I discovered the day after I was taking a photograph. I would take a photograph in an impossible situation, and I would see the result and learn something by what was happening when I took the photograph.
But you were able to make different sizes of each photo on the machine and experiment that way with different sizes and lay them out and test them all the time.
Well, when I took the photographs, I would have a result, a thing that for me was exciting to imagine blown up on a double page or on a checkerboard combination on a double page in a book.
And would you work on just maybe 2-3 spreads at a time or more, and gradually put the thing together?
What?
Did you work on maybe 2, 3, 4 pages at a time as you got the material and then gradually build it all up?
Well, each double page that I imagined in the book was, for me, a new problem, and I thought the pages of the book would be all different, and there would be no regular plan. Each double page was another problem, and when I put them all together, it became the book.
I mean, that is absolutely the key to the book, that there is no double page the same, and it's very, very difficult to do, and you brought it off. Can you tell us now a bit about the publishing of the French, the Édition du Seul book? Because I believe you took it to Delpierre first.
Well, I had some friends who knew people who worked in publishing houses, and I would show them the photographs that I took in New York, and they would say, this is unpublishable, these photographs are shit, and forget it. And I had to forget it because nobody would go along with them. And I had the idea that if I went back to Paris with these photographs, perhaps I could do something with them. And I had the luck of meeting somebody called Chris Marker, who was an editor in a publishing house that was very square, and he had a small project which were pocket books of travel, and he would kids would buy these books if they were going to Vienna or Tokyo. They would have an inside idea of where to eat, where to sleep, what to discover. And this fellow, Chris Marker, he saw the photographs, and it was the contrary of the book of the publishers that I ran into in New York. He thought that this out of the way of treating photography was right up his alley, and he said, "We'll do the book. And if we don't do the book, I quit." I slammed the door, and he was like a wunderkind. You understand, wunderkind? Of the publishing house. And they didn't want to lose him because he was a filmmaker, he was a writer, he was a layout man, and he convinced the publishing house to go along with my project, and that was it. The book came out. It was well received, and He'd won a prize, a big prize in Paris, which was le Prix Nadar. Nadar, you know, was a great hero of photography in France, and the book won the prize for that year, 1956, 1957, for photographic experiments and research, and so that was it.
But it was published in France and then an Italian edition. I think there was a British edition, wasn't there? But not an American.
There was never an American edition of the New York book. There was an edition that was done maybe 15 years later, and it did come out. But it's true that the reaction of the editors I had contacted in New York was, these photographs are shit. The take on New York, on America, was unacceptable. I mean, the Big Apple was not so great. My father would go out to work, he would take the subway, and I would look at the people in the subway, and for them the Big Apple was very far away, was on a tree, too high for most people to get a piece of the apple.
Right. Yes. You don't bite the hand that feeds you in America. So you think it was both? I mean, I'm sure it was both. Your attitude to the subject matter and also to the kind of anti-technique, if you like, because American photography at that time was very oriented to large format photography and very glossy and things like this.
I had a theory. I don't know whether this goes down well here in Vienna or Germany. For me, there were two kinds of photography: Jewish photography and Goyish photography. And if you look at what was interesting in photography in that period, in the 1950s and the 60s, you find that all the books that, all the work that I had run into were done in the style of Jewish photography, because these were urban visions and crowds and I mean, no landscape, no trees, no. I mean, I couldn't imagine that somebody like Ansel Adams, for example, would be a Jewish photographer. But all the people I liked, you know, at that time, were part of this crowded way out take on the city. So the Big Apple for me was really a camera that would confront the actual life in New York, which was heavy and harsh.
And there was at that time quite a concentration on photo books about cities. I guess it's kind of a part of the reconstruction of Europe. And so your book influenced a lot of others. I was doing a talk only 2 weeks ago about the Portuguese book Lisbon, which those two Portuguese artists admit how much New York influenced them, and they even have their index in the back, which is equivalent to your booklet that was in the book. But then you went on to, I mean, I guess you can think of them as a quartet of great city books. You did Rome in 59, I think, and then finally Moscow and Tokyo in 1964. Can you tell us a bit about the Tokyo one, because your New York book was an incredible, of all the places it was an influence, it was a great influence on Japanese photography.
For me, photography was a way of not being a tourist, of speaking about cultures that you either knew or you didn't know. I preferred to know, and the books I did, New York obviously was something I knew by heart and by instinct, and then I had the possibility. I showed the book to Fellini in Rome and in Paris. He was in a hotel. I knew the hotel, and I called up. I said, "May I speak to Mr. Fellini?" In those days, you know, a director or an artist was not surrounded by an army of public relations or assistants and so on. And I said, "May I speak to Mr. Fellini?" And they said, "One moment." And I spoke to Fellini, and I said, "I just did a book on New York. I'd like to show it to you." And he said, "Well, you know, I come tomorrow at 4 o'clock." And I went there. And he said, "You know, I know this book because it was an Italian edition." And what was interesting for me was that if I knew New York, I also knew something about Rome, Italy, and I read Italian literature, I saw Italian films, and I grew up in New York, which was 1/4 Jewish, 1/4 Italian, 1/4 whatever. And so I went to school with Italian kids, and we learned to swear in Italian. You know, we say "fangula mama," and I was amazed by the nerve of the Italian kids in the class. You know, they didn't have this American respect for teachers and program, and they would say "fangu" all the time, and we picked that up. And I had an instinct of collaboration with Italians, and when I went to Rome, I found that the attitude of people who were being photographed was very close to New York, because in New York, you know, at that time, everybody thought they deserved to be photographed and eternalized. And there was a program called King of the Day or Queen of the Day, and everybody, when they saw me with the camera, and it wasn't so obvious for somebody to be in the street with the camera. people were not insulted, they were flattered because they thought they deserved to be famous, they deserved to be eternalized with a camera, and I took advantage of that. You know, people would say to me, "What's this? What are you doing?" You know, I would take photographs in the street, and what are you doing? What's this for? And I said, well, there was a newspaper called the New York Daily News, which was printed like 2 or 3 million copies a day, and there was a page opposite the editorial page on letters to the editor. There was a column called The Inquiring Photographer, and you would see a photograph of somebody, and they would have to answer questions like, do you think it's right to beat your wife? You think it would be the end of the world if the communists took over America? And things like that. They would answer these questions. And when people ask me, what's this for? I say, well, I'm the inquiring photographer, and it's for the Daily News. And they would say, when is it coming out? And I would say, tomorrow. Tomorrow? And I said, yeah, they're coming out tomorrow. And they say, fabulous, you know. And they would go along with it and be flattered. And I found that this was true in New York, it was true in Rome. It was not true in Russia and Moscow. It was still the Cold War. I had the impression that I would not be able to take photographs in Moscow because an American with a camera would obviously be a spy and look for what was awful in a communist city. But I never ran into problems taking photographs in Moscow. I found that people didn't care really and were very often cooperative. I remember there's a photograph I have in the book where you see a girl in a bikini on the beach on the Moscow River, and when I aimed the camera at her, I thought she would run away, but she didn't. She put her hands on her hip and went along with the photograph. And it's one of the photographs that I like the most because you would see her, you would see her father, you would see her mother, her grandmother in the same photograph. And that was part of the game because photography depends, of course, on technique. And the lens I was using was a wide-angle lens. And if I would aim it at this girl in a bikini, she would think she was the center of the world, my world, and go along with the photograph and not realize that the photograph was not only her, but her father, her mother, her grandmother, and that was the advantage of using a camera. I would take photographs in New York of people that I would not dare to look at or to talk to. You know, in New York it's kind of dangerous when you're a kid to walk down the street because sometimes you'd be looking at some guy and then he would say, what are you looking at? And it's very difficult to answer. What are you looking at? And I would say, I wouldn't say you. I would say, or nothing, and they say, I'm nothing, you know, and it's kind of...
There's no right answer to that, is there?
It was kind of dangerous to look at people in the street, but with a camera, I found that there was something abstract between you and the person you are photographing, because they would say, "Here's a guy with a camera, so he must be he must be on the level. He must have the right to take a photograph." And I took advantage of this official status, taking a photograph of somebody. Somebody would have the impression that you have the right to take a photograph, and very often I didn't run into problems. It's only much later when computers were tabulating people for God knows what use, that I had the feeling that people were worried that somebody who's taking a photograph is dangerous for them, and there was a distrust. But I never really ran into problems of taking a photograph of people, because I did it very naturally. I'm kind of big, but if I took a photograph, very often people would think, well, he's taking a photograph, but he probably has the right to take a photograph. And it went on okay. I never had really problems photographing people on the street.
And did you find any difference when you came to photograph in Tokyo? Because that's probably the most different culture, and yet in the same time, the kind of cityscape of Tokyo was probably more like the New York cityscape.
Well, Tokyo was, first of all, it was a commission. My photographs were well known in Japan, in Tokyo. Photographers. I went to Tokyo. I accepted this commission by an editor to do a book on Tokyo, but I had no idea, like I had in New York or Rome, of whether what I was photographing, whether I was looking at something, it was the real thing, and it was something that I could relate to. I mean, I had no notion of what things I saw were really really worthwhile, and it was a strange experience. It was the first time I was photographing things I had no knowledge of, and for me it was something that was an experience all the time where I had no idea what whether I was right or wrong photographing this or that. And it's only nowadays that I realize that the book, first of all, the Japanese had a way of taking photographs which were very discreet and distant, and I thought I would learn something from them. But what happened, I found out, is that Japanese photographers were more interested in learning something from me rather than me learning something from them. and Japanese photographers who took photographs that I admired and didn't understand were sick of being the model for photography, and I found that young Japanese photographers were more interested in what I was doing in photography than me learning from them. And there are photographers in Japan who are taking photographs the way I took photographs. People like Daido Moriyama and others would take consciously New York-style photographs of Tokyo, of Japan, and it was a strange situation because it was the opposite of what I imagined. If anybody has a question, they just raise their hand.
Do you remember the making of Freedom? The film Freedom?
I wanted to do a film about superheroes, and I was struck by the fact that you would see this superhero doing incredible actions, but you never knew who he's working for. I mean, Spider-Man or Superman, who sent him out to clean up the world? Who was he working for? And I thought I would do a film where I would show actually what was the motivation and who was behind the action of Spider-Man or whoever. Let's make it clear. And in my film, you found the outfit that was sending Mr. Freedom out to clean up France. I treated France like a third world country, and Mr. Freedom came to France to clean up the commies and the Maoists, and I thought I would make it clear that Mr. Freedom was actually working for a fascist organization, and that was Mr. Freedom in Paris. What do you want to know about Mr. Freedom?
Was it a success, this film?
It was kind of a success, yeah. It wasn't a blockbuster by any means, but Mr. Freedom, I guess, he was a tool of the fascist organization. I guess you people know a little bit about what a fascist organization is. But Mr. Freedom was out there cleaning up the world for his sponsors who there's a scene in the film where he's taking the elevator and he pushes the different buttons for the different store floors, and you see Unilever and General Motors and all the big companies who would be profiting by the intervention of Mr. Freedom, and so he pushes the button for the top floor, which is Freedom Incorporated, and you get a good idea where he's coming from and where he's going. I guess you people know something about that.
It's not like that today, is it?
It's not like today.
Microsoft and Apple and Google.
Bill, when will we have your exhibition in Vienna, in Westlicht or in Ostlicht? I think the people here and 20,000 more would appreciate very much.
What? What's that? What's that?
When are you going to have an exhibition in Vienna?
When? When?
We were working on it.
I'm having one right now. This is an exhibition.
Any more questions? Here's Mr. Freedom. Mr. Freedom has arrived.
I'm struck by the fact that opposite the Sasha Hotel, there's the Albertina, where they have a show of Picasso and what?
Monet.
Monet. Now,
Mr. Freedom.
yeah, what I liked about the idea of that show, because Picasso is obviously a revolutionary painter, violent and using every tool in the history of painting to do what he was doing. And Monet was painting very cool subjects, a pond, water, trees, and I was struck by the fact that, I mean, he was a revolutionary painter, but in a French way. There was something that I knew, that I discovered recently, was that French Prime Minister, who was called the Tiger, who was a very strong political person. His best friend was Monet, and he, in the palace of the Prime Minister, he had set up an apartment for Monet to come and rest and work. And here was this Prime Minister from the First World War, who directed an army, who was turned on by Monet, and I thought that was very cool and great. The Prime Minister today in France is a little bit like the Tiger. He was a Catalan. I knew his parents. I knew his father. He was a Catalan painter, and he is very strong and violent against the fascist movement in France, which is Le Pen, and he's the only politician who dares to confront this fascist movement, which is taking more and more importance in France, because people are not happy, not satisfied with the lot that they are dealt, and the Prime Minister of France is actually the son of a friend of mine. His name is Manuel Valls, and he is very strong and definitive politician, and I think that's good, and good for him and good for everybody.
My question was, which advice would you give to a street photographer? To a street photographer.
What advice would you give to a young photographer?
To a young street photographer.
I always say the same thing: find a rich woman, or for a woman, find a rich man, because you need independence, and it's money that gives independence, unfortunately. So in Vienna, I guess you could find a rich woman if you look.
Well, we've been talking for over an hour, and I guess it's appropriate at the Vienna Photo Book Festival, all we've managed to talk about are probably the best and most consistent quartet of photo books in the history of the medium, and there would be so much more to talk about. We could go on for hours talking about films, talking about materialism, fascism, as it's just been touched upon. But time is up, I'm afraid. Thank you.